understand how the USMLEs and first aid work. It's important to understand that the USMLEs are tests of application. So the NBME, or the National Board of Medical Examiners, are the people who write Step 1, Step 2, and shelf exams. They also are upfront and publish the rules that they follow when they write every question. Known as the NBME Item Writing Guide, or sometimes the Gold Book, they actually share exactly what it is that they're looking for, which is critical if you want to pass or get a high score on any of the USMLEs or shelf exams. They make it abundantly clear that the exams like Step 1 and Step 2 are different from the tests that you may have taken in medical school. Instead of being about rote memorization and regurgitation of facts, the USMLEs are about the application of principles. Rule 1 states, each item should focus on an important concept or testing point. Rule 2 states, each item should assess application of knowledge, not recall of an isolated fact. At first glance, first aid may look really confusing because it feels like just a collection of facts. Instead, to understand how to best use first aid to dominate the USMLEs, we have to first consider how it was written. Legend has it that a group of enterprising Yale medical students, where first aid was founded, went up to students who had taken Step 1 and they basically asked them what was on their test. Now, obviously, it would be a huge ethical breach to actually share the real questions on the exam. So instead, they did something clever. They wrote down the basic information that you would need to know in order to answer the questions without giving the questions away. In the early years, you could use buzzwords more to answer questions. So things like gray baby syndrome for chloramphenicol use became easy ways to get extra points. However, as the NBME's Item Writing Guide demonstrates, the test has evolved well beyond memorization. You can't just rely on buzzwords anymore. You have to truly understand and apply that material. Which leads us to phase 2. Use first aid as your target. Based on the way that it was written, it should be clear now that first aid is actually a high-yield information source. Rather than being a collection of facts to memorize, it's actually your roadmap of exactly what you need to master in order to do well in the exams. What many people do when they're studying for Step 1 or Step 2 is they'll do a bunch of questions, and then they'll look at all the things that they got wrong, and they'll try to make a notebook or make a bunch of Anki flashcards so they can try to remember the things that they didn't know. The issue is that the thing that you might not know for one question is oftentimes not going to be the thing that they test you on the next. So the way that I think about this is that you have all of the information in front of you that you're supposed to understand. Your goal by, say, the end of the afternoon would be to make sure that you understand all of the different pieces of information before you move on. One of my favorite ways to do this is to go through with a highlighter, either electronic or an actual physical highlighter. I would look at the things that I know and could explain, and I would highlight those things. So for example, let's say I did know that angina was about chest pain due to ischemic myocardium secondary to coronary artery narrowing or spasm. However, let's say I didn't know that there was no necrosis, so I would leave that. Then I would just continue to go through and see like, okay, do I understand this? And if I did understand it, I would highlight it. So maybe I understand that there's stable angina is secondary to atherosclerosis, but maybe I didn't know that there was 70% or more occlusion. After I'm done making an honest assessment of all the things that I know well, now I'm left with my targets for all the things I need to make sure that I understand. My next goal is to make sure that I make flashcards where I can explain exactly why these things are true. Because again, these exams are going to test my ability to actually apply the information, not just to regurgitate it. For example, the front of a flashcard might say something like, stable angina, use the pathophysiology to explain what the serum troponin levels would be. The answer might be something simple like, there's ischemia, but not yet necrosis. And so there would be no troponin elevation because the troponins, which are on the inside of the cell, are only released once the cell is dying and the membrane is leaking and permeable to the troponins that are then ending up in the serum. In order to understand why these things are, some of my favorite resources are things like Perplexity or ChatGPT Search, where you can actually reference the sources that the information is coming from. Then just find everything that doesn't have a highlight and continue to dig deeper until you understand and have highlighted everything. Yes, this approach takes longer at first, but here's the thing. You'll never have to go back and relearn it. Do it once, understand it deeply, make your cards, and then you're done. As long as you stay on top of your flashcards, you'll never have to forget the information and have to do another pass of first aid again. Remember, the longest path isn't going slow. It's having to do everything twice because your first approach didn't work. Phase 3 is to test your knowledge. Testing your knowledge through question banks like UWorld or Amboss is critical because having the knowledge is necessary, but it's not sufficient for passing and excelling. The brutal truth is that knowing the material isn't enough. I've seen countless students who knew every single fact in first aid, but still struggled because they couldn't apply it. My favorite way of testing this is to use a question bank like UWorld or Amboss, where you do 5 questions at a time in the given subject that you just studied. So for example, if I was just studying the ischemic heart diseases, I would go to the section in UWorld for coronary heart diseases, and I would select 5 questions at a time to see how well I actually understood it. Once I met the threshold of getting 80% on 10 consecutive questions, then I would feel comfortable moving on. This is where most students fail. They think that they know it because they can recite the fact, but getting 80% on the things that they just studied is where you'll actually know if you've mastered it or not. Phase 4 is to scale your success. The ultimate goal, if you want to crush the USMLEs, is to do 40 mixed questions timed. We discussed this in the UWorld Complete Guide. You want to start with a single subtopic to make sure that everything that you're learning, you actually know how to learn it well and can get at least 80%. The next step is to move on to a full system where you can do questions from all of cardiology and get at least 80% on those questions. Then after you've, say, mastered cardiology, then you would move on to renal, and then you would go through and systematically learn the subtopics of renal before then going to all of renal. All the while aiming to have everything in that subtopic or the entire system highlighted, demonstrating that you've made cards on this and that you can use it on your exam. On the way, you can do multiple systems like cardiology and renal and GI together, while eventually you'll get to the point where you're doing completely timed mixed blocks. Phase 5 is to validate your progress, the final reality check. As the ultimate test of understanding, you need to do NBME practice exams. Here's the truth. You can get really good at answering the way that they ask you UWorld questions, but still struggle on the NBMEs or the real exams. The key is that you need to be able to answer any question correctly, not just the questions from a single source that you're used to. To do this, you're going to want to actually use the official NBME practice exams written by the NBME itself. I recommend taking your first NBME practice exam in the beginning of your studying, and the next one after you've studied 2 or 3 systems. After 2 or 3 systems, you should see your score go up by a pretty significant amount. Even if your score doesn't go up, the most important thing is to look at the scores for the things that you studied. I just learned cardiology and renal and GI. I want to make sure that I'm getting at least 80% on the cardiology and renal and GI questions on the actual NBME. If I've been doing a good job of systematically highlighting the information in the things that I'm studying, I should see my scores go up in those things. There's no better feeling in the world than if you've studied 2 or 3 systems only and you're able to see your score go up a substantial amount. What that means is that you have control over your final score. All you have to do to continue to improve your score is to just do the same thing for the next 2 or 3 systems. If you're a medical student or a doctor preparing for either the USMLEs or COMLEX or one of your medical board exams, then be sure to sign up for our free 14-step program where we'll walk you through the most efficient ways for you to improve your score in a short period of time. And if you're interested in getting there faster, be sure to book a free call with our team where we'll break down what it is that's holding you back and, if it makes sense, explain how it is that we can help you to get there more efficiently.